Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are watching this. I am CT Folly Entropy, but you can just call me Entropy. And I welcome you to the second episode that I am doing for my podcast, Lit's Lit, or just Lit Literature. And today I actually would have a lot to talk about, but I'm purposely going to be cutting out some information I'm deciding I'm just not going to talk about today. But what book that we are going to read that I'm so happy we're going to be reading again is the book Praise of Folly. The Praise of Folly is a book that, I've already read actually for school, but to read it again, I'm very happy to, because back then when I read it, I didn't even care that much about the reading I was doing. I didn't see it the same way as I do now, and I just know there's going to be a lot of good material in there that I will be very happy to cover in the future here. As of right now, we just read an introduction that was written just by some guy for Penguin Classics. We read the Penguin's Classic Publisher Edition, which always has good stuff. Penguin Classics always has a lot of extra information, sometimes a bit too much. Like I know Dorothy Sawyer's for the Dante's Inferno, the trilogy, that one. Holy cow, the information in there is almost kind of endless. But, I'll take it. I say the more the better. But anyway, I'm going to be talking a bit about what was discussed in the introduction, because it really sets the stage for this book before I actually start getting into it. And it also gives a very general theme for this book overall. So, starting, Praise of Folly was written by Erasmus in the 1500s, or 1509, I think is about close to the exact year. And originally he made it when he was ill. He made it in a week. I don't know why, but all my favorite books are either made in someone's entire lifetime or in a single week. Constellation of Philosophy by Boethius, that was made in a week, and that's one of my favorite books. Or one of my other favorites is Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, and that was a guy's lifetime. So, I don't know, maybe that's my type of book. Maybe I'll just go out there and look for books and filters that's like based on dates. I don't know if anything would do that, but whatever, there's got to be a tool out there. Anyway, so Praise of Folly was written in 1509 and in a week by Erasmus, who at the time was ill, and he wrote it just as kind of a joke, just a little joke novel for his friend Thomas More, or Sir Thomas More. Holy cow, Sir Thomas More. And the book itself is this very large, not very large, it's a very small book, but the entire thing is an allegory that originally was just a playful mockery of a lot of things in their time that ended up being this entire very blatant social commentary on their time in their culture. And it's just really cool how he did it and how it's done. Even yet, after he published it, he had written letters to other people about the book saying that he regretted it, but because it was so popular and because he found what he said in it to be very true, he actually wrote letters in defense. And I think this book by Penguin Classics actually includes one of his letters of defense at the end somewhere, and I would love to read that. I will read it. The book, he talks about just the high roles in their society and their social hierarchy, which at the time very much included their government, and at this time the government was very much controlled by the church. So he has a lot to say about the roles in the church and the people around it and in the head of government, almost to the point that it's like very radically against all of it. Around this time when Erasmus published this, the Catholic Church at the time was very corrupt, and he was kind of one of the first ones to ever post something so blatantly against it, but he was kind of the person who pushed for this revolution that came out earlier. Not the revolution, Reformation. The Reformation that was caused by Martin Luther, who around this exact same time then put the 94 Thesis on the door, nailed to the door of the Catholic Church, saying absolutely everything that they are doing wrong. And Martin Luther, I would say that he was inspired by Erasmus, but I can't validate that. But Erasmus is kind of known as the starter of this Reformation. So the main theme of this book is around a character, this personification of folly, of foolishness. And Erasmus pushes all of his passive-aggressive humor through it and all his mocking. And Folly herself has an image of a jester. And in the beginning, she celebrates all the childish desires of youth, being on this side of all the youth and childish people who take part in their, I think it lists, what was back of this, who celebrates youthful pleasure, drunkenness, and sexual desire. But suddenly it just changes demeanor throughout the book from being against it and for it, because Folly is supposed to be shown as this blatant hypocrite, but also this criticizer. And Erasmus will switch this role with Folly of being on the side of the foolish and then also criticizing. There's one that I remember so vividly, not too vividly, but I can like paraphrase it, that I remember that I have quoted a lot. It's people who, there's part in it where Folly mocks genealogists for looking at their history and the acts of all their ancestors and speaking as if they did those acts. And Folly's like, you're fools. How dare you take credit for things that you have never done simply because you're related by blood? And it's very interesting to show Folly be this voice of such obvious irrationale, but then also be such a clear voice of reason. And Erasmus does this so well. And that's why this book is absolutely phenomenal to me. And I'm excited to read it again, because a lot of the things that Erasmus talks about is almost about human behavior that we're seeing today with such a degradation of morale happening in Western culture. And that also is a great segue to what else I wanted to talk about, because that was just a bit of some history of the book Erasmus, Praise of Folly in the 1500s. But the other thing that I want to talk about was ethics. I already mentioned it. And right now we're reading, oh my gosh, how do you pronounce his last name? Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm sure that has just rang a bell in a lot of people's ears. Very, very famous guy. But he's written tons and tons of books. But right now we're reading his one on ethics. And the guy was, of course, very much a Christian. So what I have to say now is very much from a biblical, very much a biblical perspective. But before we actually started reading it, which I only ended up reading like 3 pages out of it for an assignment. Only for the reason that, in this case, we had an assignment just right before of what is the definition of ethics. And we have no resources to look at, just personally, what do we think the definition of ethics is? And it came down to more of the core reason of morals and man studying what's good and what's evil. Now, what's actually very interesting is that as soon as you pick up Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book on ethics, the first thing he does is he says that ethics is not the study of man's good and man's evil. And he makes it very clear in the beginning. Well, actually, he's not too direct. I would say he says everything and isn't, and then it leaves you to allude to what it is. And I can read off something that essentially sums all of it up. Well, actually, no, it's kind of wordy. I'm actually very lucky. A lot of the things that I read today were very wordy, so it gives me the chance to actually kind of dumb it down and actually have something to talk about, and without just regurgitating too much information, just straight word for word. So essentially, he says that ethics is not man studying man's good and man's evil, but it is actually studying God's nature, because he's the one that sets the boundaries for what's good and what's evil, because he is the ultimate authority. I was going to talk a bit more about authority if I wanted to, because I was going to talk a bit more about government and just governing systems with authority in general. But I won't go there today because I don't want this to be too long. I'm already assuming it is. But he gives one point, and it's straight, and it's alluding to the event of the fall of man that happened in Genesis. It says, "And appropriating the origin to himself, man took to himself a secret of God, which proved to be his undoing." The Bible describes this event with the eating of the forbidden fruit. Man now knows good and evil. This does not mean that he has acquired new knowledge in addition to what he knew before, but the knowledge of good and evil signifies the complete reversal of man's knowledge, which hitherto had been solely knowledge of God as his origin. So essentially, it's saying that what's good and what's evil all originated from God, and it kind of brings up the topic of kind of like predestination and free will. But in man taking upon us being the origin of what's good and what's evil because of our free will, we gave ourselves an individuality that separated us from God. And he was like, ethics, we shouldn't be studying what man finds as good and evil. We are inherently evil and we are all sinners. That's not what we should do. If we were going to really study what's good and what's evil, we are supposed to look at the true origin, the one who has created everything and has set the boundaries, and that is God. So that is actually all I have even gotten out of the first just 4 pages of reading his book on ethics. And I will continue to talk more. I'm sure some of these videos will get insanely long of how much I have to talk about, with how much Bonhoeffer will probably end up covering. And same thing for Praise of Folly. I'm sure I'll have a lot to say with a lot of the material in there. But that's all I have to say. And I will see you tomorrow. I'm already thinking that there might be days where I won't have anything to talk about. So don't be surprised if just there's not a video one day out of the week or something. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for listening.